Welcome everyone. It's time to tap your personal power and pull up a cup for this episode of the InPower Coffee Break. I'm Mary Brody and I work with Dana Theus at InPower Coaching. And today we have on Sharon Miller. We had her on a few, I think actually now it's more than a couple of weeks ago. It might be almost a month ago. And she was sharing her career experiences. And so today we're going to discuss a new topic. And it's going to be ownership. And you might think that, oh, well, I know what ownership is, and it's a really straightforward topic. And from chatting with Sharon about it and talking with Dana and researching it online, we've identified at least 3 definitions for what it means to own. Sharon was just telling me about like 3 or 4 other ways you can own something at work. And then we started a discussion about being the CEO at your desk and what that means to own. So it should be quite a lively discussion today. So again, we're on Facebook, and if you're live on the video and want to join the conversation, just go into the chat window and let us know, and we'll bring you right in. So we hold these coffee breaks live every Tuesday at 1 p.m. Eastern. Noon Eastern. We've changed our times to explore InPower topics and strategies that help you achieve work-life satisfaction and lead in a pro-human workplace. So join us live, watch and listen to past recordings at coffeebreak.InPowerCoaching.com. And you can also subscribe to our podcast on iTunes at InPower Coffee Break. So now we're going to start getting to it. And let's talk about ownership. And I think the question maybe we start with is maybe to define it. And I read a definition about ownership versus personal accountability. So it's not, but some people do see it that way. So we've got personal accountability versus owning a task versus being the person responsible for the success of the product or project. And that gets into also you have the person who's responsible for the ROI, who may be different. And then there's more. So I don't know, Sharon, if you want to share some of your thoughts on that just to get started.
Sure. Thank you. Yes, I've attacked this in many different ways, but one thing that we just were, recently talking about is primarily for me, I've been a strategic owner of a life cycle campaign. Most particularly as it pertains to events. And what that means is I take the end-to-end approach for the event plan, pull in an integrated pieces of the marketing mix, because they're usually, events are a great way to run integrated campaigns as well. And so I pull all those pieces together. So I own the strategy. I roll up my sleeves and execute, but I don't own ultimately the program itself or the ROI. However, I also, as part of the campaign lifecycle, I have to track and monitor and report on the campaign effectiveness. So while it's end-to-end, inception to distribution, ultimately, when results get reported, it is not by me as an individual contributor, there's another word that's part of this conversation, but it's the owner of the campaign or the program, if you will. In this case, it's usually a director, senior director or a VP with whom I've worked, and they deliver on that. Now, another piece of this and another angle could be the recognition piece of this.
Right.
Because the owner is used to sitting with their peers and simply reporting on the campaign and the results. They rarely mention, by the way, kudos and a shout out to X.
Yeah, because an owner doesn't have to manage.
We were
right. Yeah, because what's interesting, I think, is you've got because I'm going to bring in the Agile owner, right, and how that works. Because an owner doesn't always manage; they don't manage the team all the time, right? So you can have an owner who is, like you said, an independent contributor, And there might be someone who is a manager, but they don't manage these other people. And I know like in Agile, when you talk about like a product owner, that's usually the person who's responsible for that bottom line ROI. If this product doesn't work, they're the person who's pulled into the meeting and, you know, read the riot act. Yeah. Like a product.
Right. That would be the right.
They're read the riot act. But then there's also who gets the call, because then you also have certain marketing managers who, like you said, might not have the ROI, but if an exec isn't happy, they're the owner and they're called in.
So that's sort of a differentiation where I've seen people struggle with, are you the product manager?
Right.
I mean, or where you're talking about product marketing and what that means, right? What is that?
Manager, yeah. What does it mean?
You get a product manager.
Right. A product manager. And then how much do they own? Because I know that changes company to company as well. Sometimes they'll just own the roadmap. Sometimes they're also in charge of the ROI and if the product is making any money, and that's their problem. And that's their measurement. A product manager would say, yes, I own all that, with a product marketing, but that product manager would say to the product marketer, who could also be a manager, you develop the white papers around this, you're going out to the event, you're doing that breakout session, you're marketing the product externally facing. Right. And your measure of success could be related to ROI.
That's right.
Potentially. I mean, that depends, like you said, the reward and what you're measured and how you're measured.
That's right. So I wouldn't say, so the beauty of this conversation is that while these things occur in organizations of all scale and across industry, it means very different things in different companies.
Yeah, and this gets into the fluid career thing, right? Like your career can change. Like people go from being a consultant to an entrepreneur to a manager to an independent contributor. Like you just switch depending on where you want to go next. And I think that brings up all these different issues of ownership and if you're contributing or if you're just influencing. Because I know I've gone from the employee side back to consultant, and then I go and influence again versus own. And be the person whose head rolls if things don't go the way they're supposed to go.
And I've been strategic, but not an influencer.
Okay,
that's another piece.
You're saying.
So
yeah, right.
Right. So as a marketing program and project manager, if you will, while I can pull together the life cycle, the campaign life cycle, goals, objectives, audience, which stakeholders do we pull in? Is it regional, global? How long is it running? What's the market sector? What's the persona? Will there be an event tie-in? PR. I'm speaking obviously as a marketeer and enterprise marketeer here. Right. But will we have thought leadership? Where's the PR angle? We got to communicate these things out. That is complete end-to-end strategic pulling together, starting with the straw man, getting buy-in, and then rolling back up with those stakeholders. Who are the key stakeholders? There's always SMEs, which are typically either product management or product marketing. Then I don't serve that up to the VP or the SVP. It's usually, I then take that straw man, the director reviews it, provides me feedback, fleshes it out, but bottom line, it's my architected plan. Right. And then it's off to the races. Yeah. And I don't see it again till I start to roll up my sleeves and execute as the project lead.
Yeah, I was going to say that it becomes the project lead and what you own. And that's, and if stuff, it's not, and you don't own, I know from being the project lead, it's a little different because you don't own necessarily that end. Like a product manager, like if their stuff doesn't sell in the market, it's because they prioritize their features wrong, right? Usually.
Right.
And that's
and a very different way to test versus a campaign. What didn't work? Was it the message? Was it the audience? Was it what else was going on in region at that time? Or did it pull an AMS but not an E? I mean, there's so many variables.
Right. And it's all, and who, but who owns what part? right? That's what it always comes back to. Who owns what part of it and what are you responsible for? And like, what's the difference? Like, how do you define the difference between personal accountability versus that ownership? How do you see the difference, or is there a difference? And when people talk about this, are they making that up?
Well, I mean, to me, so being the sociologist in me, when I hear personal accountability, to me, that's a very humanistic term. Okay, personal accountability means being accountable for everything you say and everything you do, and how it reflects and relates on others. So there's personal accountability in and outside of the workplace, and you have to own your personal accountability. No one else can own that for you.
That's true.
That might be a different path. I took that.
No, but it's an interesting path, because it leads to what you do own. And when you were talking about being the CEO at your desk, which we'll get to in a minute, but yeah, this is leading to it very quickly. And
because you need to be, if you're really going to be, that's right. To your point, if you're really going to be a CEO at your desk, then that is all accountability, regardless of, and you can't think about what piece you own, and why, and what your title is versus the pieces that your peers or colleagues own and what their titles are. The success of the project has to be on mutual respect and collaboration, and a clear understanding of who's doing what as part of the overall project.
Yeah, that gets interesting, because then depending on your personality, that could get into some interesting boundary issues of who does what.
That's
and
right.
What they're responsible for, and if they're just influencing, because you want the success, but if you're getting into an area that's a little gray. I know I've worked with colleagues where I want the success, and I might see that it's not going so great, but I don't own that, right? And
and that could be a decision for you right then and there, that when you see it going south and you want it saved and your name is part of that, how are you willing to do more heavy lifting as a result, to make it successful, even if ultimately you don't own it? There are some people that are willing to do, well, guess I did my piece. Bill was supposed to do his, John was supposed to do theirs. And, that's all I'm going to do. Some people just draw the line and say, this is what I was tasked to do. And there are others that go, even though John and Bill did not do their piece, I'm willing to pick up some slack here for the overall system.
Right. And you're right, this also gets into respect as well, because for these other colleagues you have to give them a chance to do their piece.
Right. And
yeah.
Too many cooks in the kitchen sometimes, or, too many chefs, and, not enough cooks, or, that whole thing. So ownership. So for me, personal ownership definitely is not only being responsible for what I say and do, and it's also what I know I'm absolutely responsible for as part of the bigger picture, the bigger project, and a willingness. I'm no saint, but there's certainly a willingness for me to roll up my sleeves and help others.
Right.
I'm that pick up that extra slack.
Right.
And ultimately, when it comes to the execution, so some things are more visible than others. So
true.
From a marketing campaign perspective, that's all very visible, whether it's in print or digital, out in market. Definitely an event is. And, perception is reality. So when things are going well, you don't always hear it, but when
they're not,
when there's a misstep on some signage at the event, or, something's not happening with the promotion, or we're not getting as much booth, things like that. That's all very, very visible, and that's all accountability. So while I own the event strategy and execution, ultimately in that case, then when things don't go well, or there's a misstep, the hanging sign didn't get there, it's coming tomorrow, the event started today, ultimately, who owns that? Who takes the arrow for that? And oftentimes it's, while I feel personal ownership and accountability since I'm in charge of the execution and the logistics and such, I've been in situations where my director, somebody above me, says, well, I ultimately own this and I needed to know, or I need to know everything. I'm accountable for everyone below me who is helping to make this successful.
Yeah, you know what you're raising.
You see what I'm saying? Yeah.
It's interesting because like being doing the entrepreneur thing, right? I always see like the buck stops with me, right? If I don't do it, then it doesn't happen.
You own it. Everything.
But at the end of the day, this is where it gets interesting with clients. I think this is why I'm always so fascinated with boundaries and ownership, because I don't own their stuff, right? So I'm in there to help them, and I have to put my own brakes on mentally and be like, I just don't own that. Like I wouldn't do it that way, or I would do it this other way, but I can't do it.
But with you, if you know that you're, I don't know if it's your name a part of it, if you know, this is an interesting conversation, and I think we've mentioned this before. There definitely needs to be boundaries as a consultant that you are. So you are tasked with advising them on the best way to implement, drive, run, execute, strategize.
Yes, I might actually do it too, and I might actually do it. I might do the execution, depending.
That's right. So when you see the best, you're giving them the best advice and service you can. They're paying for your expertise. Your client might say, don't want it. Don't want to do it that way. I want to do it this way.
Right. And
I'm sure you've been in those situations. And then when things go south for them, do they come back and say, we asked you, you know, what do? Do you say, I advised you this way?
Oh, that's I do the joke. That's why I do the joke of the we and the I and the you. So when we succeed, right? It's we succeed. We all did it together. We all agreed. We succeeded. And if the client does something that I advise them, that's probably a bad idea for all of these reasons, and they continue and they move forward. That's when, if things go south, right? If things succeed, some consultants will say, well, we succeeded. I'll actually say you succeeded because this was your thing because I didn't agree with you. But sometimes I will say, well, this was your doing. Now we have to fix what you did.
I won't ask you what the clients say when you tell them that.
They don't, a lot of times actually, because I've had feedback on this from clients, and they pointed it out to me what my language becomes. And they find it funny. Like at first, like they didn't get what I was doing because you don't, I think English speakers, native English speakers, we have messy pronoun usage and we don't realize sometimes. And they realize, some of my clients realized that my pronoun usage was very intentional when I did it. Because again, being in consulting for so long and you're trained about, because it's ingrained in your head about this accountability versus influence versus whatever, right? It's just because you have to draw those boundaries or else you can get into a real sticky situation.
That's right.
And the ones that did point it out, like they thought it was funny as all get out. They're like, so you just told us that we failed and you knew better.
Right. Or we failed because we didn't follow your advice.
And I just laughed and I'm like, well, I guess you have a point. And they're like, Mary, they're like, come on.
Say it in a different language, Mary. Yeah, right.
Yeah. Basically, they were like, this is kind of uncool. And I'm like, yeah, but this is, and it goes back to the boundaries, right? I can only go so far.
Right.
And I can only advise and give so many options. And then it's out of my hands and my control. And I think this is where it gets really interesting when you go from career to career. Because I encounter this too with new consultants where they'll ask me like, how do you deal with this boundary thing? Because I'm used to the owning, right? And they might be owning like at a program level, or they might have owned the strategy. And even then owning the strategy, like I give proposals, I give recommendations.
Right.
You can use that strategy or not. That's not up to me to make that decision. I'm making a proposal. And until you formally say this is a good idea, I'm going to I don't know what to do. I know it sounds.
Well, that's right, because ultimately they have to decide, and like strategy is only good with the buy-in, and once you have the buy-in,
right.
it's only as good as how well it's executed, and it will be executed well with that buy-in. The other piece that perhaps, and I can only speak to this having been, I'm always the client, I'm not the independent consultant, but I also see the struggle that sometimes consultants can have, given that as the client, I'm hearing and seeing things on the political spectrum internally that I can't bring to your attention given boundaries.
Yes, exactly. And that is one, I think that's one benefit some people see as a consultant, is that there is that line, right, that's in the sand, that the political side I don't get involved in because you can't. And that's something that the employee gets. Sometimes the consultant, they have their own, if they're independent and they're working on their own, that's one thing. But if you're in a consulting firm, I mean, you have your own drama. So not only do you have your client's drama that you're trying to avoid and tiptoe around the minefields, you have your own set of drama in your team.
That's right. You're almost in a sandwich.
Yes. And if there's
consulting firm and your peers there, and then clients. So
and you might have other consultants too, and the drama between the other consultants. Like, do you get along? Is there a power play between consultants of who's going to win more work? This gets into a lot. Like ownership gets, I think, so fascinating. Because I heard from, and this is where it got really interesting too. I heard from one firm. They were talking to me about ownership, and I'm like, well, wait, you're a consulting firm. How can you own anything? Like, you don't own, like, you shouldn't even be using that language. Like, I never use ownership language. Like, I use ownership language. Yeah, I use ownership language when I talk about Gearmark. When I talk about clients, I don't own anything of theirs. That's such a gray space. And if I don't know what to even advise them on, I will claim mea culpa. I don't know what to do here.
Well, that's why we have processes called SOWs, right? Those are
That's true.
You can hear my corporate hat. You clearly know I know process. And that's where I go, okay, here's gray. Where can I eke out some black and white where it's really clear, right? Now, I can function very well in the gray, but SOWs, now, are they the letter of the law? No, in many cases, they're not. It's a structure of where the consultant should be, what services should be rendered, what they're delivering.
Yes.
Sometimes it's broad and vague, and sometimes very clear and specific. But at the end of the day, it's like you're being tasked with and paid for guidance, advice, strategy.
Yes.
Not ownership.
Yeah. I always see that as that's the company.
I could be off there, but
no, because that's where I always see the company, like someone who's an employee, right? Even if they, like you're saying, you own the strategy, someone else owned the program, but at the end of the day, you guys are owning stuff, right? Like
that's right.
Ultimate decision. This is where I always have trouble with firms when I start hearing on their side ownership, because I'm like, wait a minute, when you're doing work for a client, I think this is the analogy I use all the time. This is one I told you the other night. Like, okay, so you do work for the client, and let's say a bad decision's made, right, along the way in the project. And let's say, even you as a consultant did a bad decision and the client's really mad. And we've seen this before, that someone does it, like, let's say they build a product for someone, architecture flaw, right? Client, who's the owner, well, everyone's going to come down on them. Why'd you spend so much money, right? That's who they're going to come down on, and the action that they're going to do is tell the firm, go away, because we have a bad decision. Bad decision could have come from client, could have come from vendor. Doesn't matter, right? Doesn't matter because it's broken, right? Vendor goes away. They just skip away and go get another project, and it's not a big deal. And that person's life as an employee, they could potentially not get another job over something like that.
Right.
Do you know what I mean? There are more, I think, I know I've gotten this feedback as being a consultant that I have the safe route, which in some ways is true, because I don't necessarily own it. I can give all the advice in the world I want. At the end of the day, if things go south, I just go, oh, okay, great, thanks, client, and run away.
And they're left, as the adage
holding the
says,
bag.
holding the bag. You know, like in some companies where they only hire agencies, you know, if the agency delivers, great. Then executives are happy that they made the right choice.
Right.
To have the agency drive and manage.
Right.
And actually own in that case, if they're the, you know, or maybe not own, I don't know. I'm still deciding that. But when you, but at the same token, if the agency doesn't do well, where the executives may not take ownership, they would just say the agency failed.
Right. Right.
So there's a transfer of ownership.
Yes. Yes. Because you don't know what exactly happened. I know sometimes I've been on it, and it is a tricky, it's as the British would say, a sticky wicket, right?
Sticky wicket. Yeah.
You know, you have like the company, and then you have the vendor, right? The client and vendor, and the client might say, I really want this to happen. And the vendor will give all these options, and they might not have given an option, or they might not have been on the client so much. That's where it gets really interesting, if a vendor fails and the ownership, because the ownership always does come back. That's why they might fire them or keep them, right? Depending on how they know how the story went.
That's right.
Because at the end of the day, the vendor, I think the ownership and the control the vendor always has is the advice and the questions they can ask to get the best result, and to listen to what the client has to say. And when they don't do that, that's when it gets weird. But they don't own it. Like, that's
my client said, I asked for this and you delivered that.
Right, right. And if you're not going to deliver what they want, then you have to give them the heads up and the rationale of why you didn't do it.
That's right.
And that's what you own as that part of it, but you don't own like their final call. Like, you can't, it's hard for you to use that word.
Well, another interesting twist to that is where, as the client, we're driving the agency with what we want.
Yeah.
We bring our also some ideas in vein, you know, along that vein.
Yeah.
Ultimately, we want them to come up with that creative idea. But sometimes, as the client, we bring our own creative ideas to the table that maybe they can be fleshed out. Here's what we're starting with. Here's the direction we want to go.
Right.
And sometimes I have received pushback from an agency, poo-pooing, if you will, every idea. And I've questioned, and it's happened more than once, and I've questioned it with my peers. And my thought process on this was, perhaps they really like the creative that we're, you know, the foundation that we want to start with. And why? Because we know our persona best. You know, we know our audience best, our broader audience. We know what this venue is all about.
Yes.
We can expect even more than them, no matter how much research they do. And if they're still negating everything that we as the client, we have to go, okay, show us what you got, bring it. But you know, to go back to my earlier point is, I believe that sometimes they do, you know, push back on it and poo-poo it because they don't want to use the client's ideas, because they want to have their own ideas and make it their own, because they feel like that's what they're getting tasked with.
That's true.
And maybe there's ego involved, even if they agree with the idea.
They sometimes want to feel like they're earning their money. They want to feel like they're earning their money rather than necessarily, like you said, the client always knows they own, like you said, they own their customer base. They know them, right? They know their business strategy. As a consultant, you're coming in, you're like a tourist. You're coming in, you're doing this little tour of this little thing you're doing. Yeah, and you leave. Right. And again, they're stuck with the results, like whatever you decide to do, good, bad, or indifferent.
That's right.
Yeah, this is actually really interesting. We're at time.
Oh my goodness. I get so engaged with these conversations, and I so enjoy these InPower coffee chats. So thank you for allowing me the time to share my thoughts on this with you today as well, Mary.
Oh, thank you, Sharon. This was awesome. I wish we had, it's almost like we should have you back to talk more about ownership, because I think there's so much, it's such a broad topic. That's why I think we started with the personal accountability versus owning bottom line, because it's like, that's the crux, but it's too big to talk about in 30 minutes.
I agree. And I like the balance with us too is that I'm speaking from a very client side perspective. It's a great balance to have you on the agency side, if you will, but the consultancy side. So it's wonderful to get both sides of the fence in these conversations.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, totally. This was awesome. Thanks so much for coming on today, Sharon.
You're very welcome. It was my pleasure to speak with you and the listeners today. And I welcome the opportunity to either continue this conversation or, always happy to come back for additional topics.
Oh, yeah. Please come back. And everyone, thanks for tuning in to this episode of InPower Coffee Break. And please visit us at coffeebreak.InPowerCoaching.com to see upcoming topics, past recordings, and learn how you can join us live. And so thank you, everyone, and have an Empower day.
Have a great day. Bye-bye.
Bye.